we're very excited about our candidate. He has been involved in politics in the state of Connecticut for 40 years, is really a preeminent expert on education policy. It is what he has dedicated his time and energy on for several years. He runs a blog, and it's a great blog. If anybody is looking for it, it's called Wait What? And jonathanpelto.com is the URL. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jonathan Pelto.
Is it easier? This microphone sort of has a kind of hard to hear. Is it easier to do? Probably easier to do it without it, I would think, or at least put it away. Well, thank you. I have the enviable task of setting the stage for a real hero to come and talk to us in a few minutes after she gets done with her interview. And there are a lot of people here who have made today possible and who stand here on this opportunity to have an impact on this debate across the country and across Connecticut and across the 2nd Congressional District and across the legislative districts and across New London, who have been working so hard to make our communities a better, safer, healthier place to live and raise a family. So my job is really to fill some time here as she finishes up an interview and to lay the foundation for why we're here. And there's probably few people in this room who need any degree of introduction about why we're here. We're here because it's time to stand up and speak out and make a difference, and you all have been doing that. It's time to speak up and stand up and take action because so few people in our country are willing to do that, particularly those that are in power. The Democratic and Republican parties, of which I've been a Democrat from the day I turned 18, when I went down to the town hall in Mansfield, Connecticut, and registered as a Democrat. I was proud to be a Democrat. I worked on political campaigns from George McGovern to Gary Hart to Bill O'Neill to Bill Siebus, Barbara Kennelly, many others, where I was proud to work for people that believed, like I did, that we needed a government that was more active in solving the problems that faced our country. And as I noticed over time, I don't believe that I walked away from the Democratic Party, although I ran as a petitioning candidate for governor and now running as a Green Party candidate for Congress, that I walked away from the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party walked away from me and from a lot of others. And so we're faced with the reality that as I went in this morning to my town hall and changed my registration after all these years from Democrat to Green, and I did that proudly because it gave me a chance not only to come here and say, as of this morning, I'm a member of the Green Party, but because symbolically it creates an understanding of what we're up against. On the Republican side, we have false patriots who wrap themselves in a symbol of the flag, really only to undermine the nation's most important principles and values. They are false prophets that are driving us towards the abyss. A nationalist approach that makes us fear for the very essence of what we are supposed to believe in and be as Americans. And it's something that is sweeping the world, but most importantly, it is prevalent here. And watching last night and the night before and the night before that, and undoubtedly tonight, the Republicans, and you wonder, are these really the kind of Americans who could stand up and be proud, or who would even know, let alone recognize and support the elements of the 10 amendments, the Constitution, the Declaration of the Independence, the things that we believe in. Because every single thing that comes out of their mouths is opposed to those fundamental values. And then on the other side, the group that has traditionally been those that have stood up to speak out on behalf of those in need and those vulnerable, who spoke out for peace and prosperity, who spoke out on helping everyone rise up to the fullest of their potential, are basically saying, join us so that we can stay the course despite record inequality, stay the course despite an endless war, stay the course despite austerity budgets, stay the course despite environmental and education policies that are minimizing and demeaning and cutting down what we can be as opposed to building up. If we would listen to the stay the course folks, we'd not only stay in this endless war and continue the growing inequity, but we would see for ourselves, and most importantly for our children and future generations, the creation of what would in essence be a truly second-class economy, a second-class society, a society in which there's a small number of those who have and a much larger number of those who have not, where we have a country and a world that is driving faster and faster towards the edge of the cliff, in which global warming and chaos is all that remains for us to wait for. So the responsibility falls on us to speak up. It falls on Jill Stein to speak up. It falls on you and I to speak up. To have the courage and the conviction to say what needs to be said. Sometimes it's about winning elections, but I've found more often than not, it's about raising issues, about talking about the truth, about being truth tellers, about forcing ourselves and our nation, our state, our communities to come face to face with the real problems that plague our society. It is not about minimizing the problems, but about talking openly and honestly about the problems. And that list of an agenda that we all share, although different parts of us work on different pieces of it, a basic understanding that fairness and equality and in an egalitarian society, it's important to create a system that allows each and every person to live to the fullest of their potential. Something that is very, very different than the policy goals of the Republicans, or I'm ashamed to say, the policy goals of the Democrats. But it's our policy goals, and that's why we're here today, and that's why we're working on collecting petition signatures. That's why we're waiting so that Jill Stein can talk to us about her campaign, and why I decided to run for Congress as a Green Party candidate in the 2nd Congressional District. It's about creating a tax system that stops coddling the rich, where fair and progressive taxes raise the revenues that we need to fund critical services and to reduce the debtor status of our nation. It's about having energy and environmental policies that promote a strong economy and move us away from that abyss of climate change and endless wars. It's a foreign defense policy that actually is dedicated to making us better and safer as people, better as a nation, where we can be seen as a country that once again is a beacon of hope that fulfills what is stated on Lady Liberty, what is created when we were created, by bringing in a country that is honestly and openly and proudly bringing immigrants so that more generations can do what we and our parents and grandparents did for this country. And it's about an education policy that promotes and not limits every person's ability to live their lives to their greatest potential. And before I get into that, which is really one of the primary reasons that I decided to seek the nomination and run as a Green Party, let me go back just a moment to that idea of a defense and security that actually makes us more secure and gives us a chance to be a beacon of a participant in the nation, in the world, and to be seen as somebody that can hold themselves up proudly. In the late 1970s, I served as Chris Dodd's youth coordinator, his errand boy. It was my start in politics. I spent 5 years traveling with him across eastern Connecticut when he was a congressman, long before he became a senator. It gave me a chance to learn the political ropes and to see somebody who, at that point, was really in touch with the important issues of the time. And one of the things that struck me that has changed so much is that in every speech he gave, still talking about the importance of defense spending and Connecticut being a center of defense and having major companies here, was that every speech always included a provision that talked about defense conversion. That it was 40 years ago that even an establishment politician recognized that war was not the long-term answer, and that had we done what we should be doing, had we done what we should have done, we'd now be building train cars instead of weapons of mass destruction. Now, these are difficult times, and people can have reasonable debates about which weapon systems work and don't work, but what we can't debate is that we are wasting so much money on a war that we cannot win in a place that we do not belong. And one of the things that I'd like to do as a candidate is to re-enter that phrase of defense conversion. That there's no reason that we should not have a law at the federal level and policies here at home in Connecticut that every dollar that comes in, 10%, 20%, 30%, should be set aside for the kind of defense conversion so that our children can work in factories and businesses that are building weapons of productivity and weapons of opportunity rather than weapons of mass destruction. So those are many of the issues that I'd like to talk about, and while I respect Joe Courtney tremendously, he and I served together in the legislature. I've given him lots of money, even when there were in these times that I haven't had a lot of money to give, he used my office for his campaign headquarters 2 of the times that he ran. So I know Joe, I like Joe, but I'm running proudly, not against Joe, but to talk about these issues and make sure that we have a healthy debate and a healthy discussion, because that's what creates a healthy democracy. And I would say, even though he may not agree, or some of his people may not agree, I think it actually helps to have a contested race, because under contested races and races where there's no contest at all leads to greater apathy, and greater apathy leads to the kind of checking out that's occurred with many Americans. So those are the kinds of issues that we're going to talk about over the course of the next 2 months or so, 3 months as we move through August, September, and October. But there's one in particular that I want to talk about, and that is education. And I'll use what time I have left to make sure that we spend a few moments, and then if there's time, I'd be happy to answer any questions. One of the major reasons we're in trouble these days is because we didn't listen to Eisenhower's famous warning the night before he handed over the Oval Office to John F. Kennedy. It's something that most people vaguely know about, perhaps. Maybe they heard about it in school. Some are old enough to have heard it at the time. But it's interesting that a war general, a war hero, spent his last speech in the Oval Office to warn of the military-industrial complex. He understood that there was a creation of a system in place that would destroy the essence of our country, both as a democracy and as an economy. Because it was a system that was going to create the notion that through fear, we could create a population that would spend endless amounts of money on the engines of war. And what's more than that, the solution to the international problems that existed was to hand that money over to the private sector and a small group of elite who would make massive amounts of money and in the process build weapon systems, many of which did not work, but all of which were meant to convince us that we were somehow safer. And here we are, 56 years later. And if he was alive today, I am absolutely convinced that somebody of his character and honesty would say, not only beware, as he had said, not only look at what happened to the military-industrial complex, but beware of the education-industrial complex that is now undermining public education. The rise of charter schools, of turning our schools into little more than testing factories, undermining educators and the teaching profession, creating ways in which scarce public funds are devoted to more software, so there can be more consultants, so that we can buy more technology, so that we can test kids on that technology when in fact we haven't even given them the tools to understand, let alone succeed in the complex world in which they will grow up in. That what's happened in education is probably the single greatest threat to our national security, or what is happening in education is the single greatest threat. That's not to say that we don't have a need for education reform, we certainly do. But the factors that limit educational opportunity and educational achievement are poverty, language barriers, special education needs, and an ability to provide children with all the tools that they need, not only to learn and collect the knowledge, but learn the skills on how to think and how to be participants in a complex but egalitarian society. And we're not doing that. This latest bill that passed, that took the place of the No Child Left Behind, the No Child Left Untested Act, which was followed by the Race to the Top, was proof that the attack on education is bipartisan in nature. As bad as George Bush was on education, Barack Obama was 10 times worse. And they passed a bill this last year, which Joe Courtney voted for, and I understand that their argument was, well, it's a little bit better. But little bit better meant that children still need to be tested every single year, that our curriculum is being driven by just two topics, English and math. And while English and math are important topics, they're hardly what's necessary to create the tools that children need, whether they're in cities or suburbs or in rural areas. This legislation that passed not only requires that children are tested every year, not only requires that they follow a common core that limits, not expands opportunity, not only is it that they have little to no support for the real challenges that we face. When a child comes and is hungry, they're not going to learn as well. When a child doesn't know English, they're not going to learn as well. When a child has special education needs that aren't addressed, they're not going to learn as well. That they talk about personalized learning, but they don't mean personalized learning to give every child the tools and the knowledge to succeed. They mean personalized learning in that we'll set every kid at a computer where we will spend what little money we have, not on the quality of our teachers, and not only on the quality of our, not on the quality of our teachers, not on the quality of our schools, but on whether or not we have computers and software that will teach that one child one item over and over again until they can pass a test. If we care about where this country is going, if we're really ready to roll up our sleeves and do what's necessary, we need to lay out this agenda of action. An agenda on taxes, an agenda on energy, and an agenda on environment, an agenda on defense and security, and a real agenda on education. We need to take back the notion of education and put public back in public education. That's both for the primary, the secondary, and of course, the higher education level. That the only loan that you cannot, now that we have record low rates, the only loan that you cannot renegotiate is your student loans. I know, because I just had a child graduate from college, that I was given the choice of either bankrupting and burdening her so that she would never be able to buy a home, perhaps never even buy a car, or whether I would take on the debt in her name. So now at the age of 55, I'm faced with the reality that my goal in life is to pay off my home mortgage and take my student loan debt with me. That's not a healthy thing for anybody, let alone working families of this country. And I have a second daughter who's headed off to college next year, and literally no way to pay for that. When you have that kind of insecurity, when you have a system of education in which some have and many have not, when you have a system of taxation in which some are coddled and many are not, when you have a defense system where some have jobs, but the jobs are to create weapons of destruction rather than the machines that would make us a better world. When you have education policies and environmental policies and defense policies and tax policies that make us less than what we can be, then it's time to stand up and speak out. Yeah. And so now, here we are, in this room, on this day, talking about what we can do to make a difference. Talking what we can do to bring the reality of the problems that we face, whether it is the tremendous racism and racial isolation, or whether it's the problem that private companies are taking over our public schools. We can do it. We can do it because we're here, and we can do it because we have leaders that are willing to speak up, and we can do it because all of us are willing to do that as well. I mean, if we were to go down that list, the anti-intellectualism, which we mock as people who understand, yet we don't understand that it has infiltrated the most fundamental levels of our society. From Connecticut, from Massachusetts, from the beginning of our country, was the notion that public schools were created and run locally. And while there are lots of things that the federal government can and should be doing to make our world a healthier, better, and safer place to live, one of the things that it should not be doing is requiring that a child in Connecticut be trained exactly the same way. And the word trained is starting to get at that very issue that you're talking about. It's telling that, first off, anybody who knows, anybody who's looked at the data, anybody who's thought about this, anybody who's been in a classroom, knows that standardized testing is driven primarily by income and background, that what happens is it is an extraordinarily discriminatory form of manipulation. Because those kids that grow up with opportunity do better, and those kids whose opportunities have been lessened do worse. So what do we do as a nation? Under Bush and then Obama, we created a system in which every school will be rank ordered. And how will it be rank ordered? It will be rank ordered on standardized testing. So we know that that means the white elite will be at the top and the people of color will be at the bottom. We then say the lowest cohort must be privatized, an unending supply of opportunity for the private sector to take over the quote-unquote failing schools. Why are they failing schools? Because we won't provide the funds that are necessary. We won't provide the support for English language learners. If you live in a town like mine, a suburban town of Mansfield, where the University of Connecticut is, every special education student has one, maybe one-on-one or two-on-one. That is, there is an aide in the room who is dedicated to helping that student or maybe two students. In Bridgeport, Connecticut, they did away with 800 instructional assistants. There are no instructional assistants in the Bridgeport school system. So in Mansfield, a child gets an opportunity to, whether they have special education needs or not, to learn. But in Bridgeport, they don't. So you rank order all of those schools, a self-fulfilling prophecy. You privatize the lowest cohort of schools. You then label on top of that the notion that the only things you're going to test on is English and math, again, very important things, but you're not going to require history, you're not going to require science, you're not going to require the arts. And so in a town like Mansfield, you have an art teacher, you have a music teacher, you have Suzuki programs, and in Bridgeport, the art comes on a cart maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks. And we wonder why it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that the racism, the lack of appreciation, the lack of opportunity is started at kindergarten. A study came out yesterday that showed that at our charter schools, almost 85% of the kindergartners are suspended in the course of their first year. Because what they want to do is they want to create students who will not move, who will not think, who will not talk, and who will sit there and listen. And in suburban schools and in wealthy schools, there are no suspensions. I mean, you would never hear of a child being suspended. They might get some help for their behavior activities if they're biting students. But the notion that you would whole-scale suspend kindergartners is a product of the notion that this isn't about educating children. This is about making consumers that will follow orders, who will do what they're expected to do, and who will never have the skills to become productive, real productive members of our society, to the point that they can go ahead and live to the fullest of their lives. So education, as I said, is just one of those issues, and every time we turn. So with that, let me turn it back to Tim, who will then introduce somebody who is a true hero, a spectacular leader for our cause, and somebody who in many respects I decided to run because I wanted the honor of being able to run on the same ticket as the person that Tim is about to endorse.